Good evening, friends, and welcome to Moonshot Conversations, Salian. It's a pleasure to be with you here online. Lena and I are overjoyed that you join us. That uh, feels like such a perfect introduction to 2021. Happy New Year, Salian, from our entire corroboree, and Happy New Year to all of you, friends.
Sally
Happy
Ann,
New Year to all of you.
you've made my Christmas, my New Year, and it's soon going to be my birthday. So you've made my birthday as well. Your appearing on Moonshot Conversations is like a huge gift. So thank you for being here.
I want to say thank you for having me. And I have to tell you, I love people who are born either in December or January. I call them my edge people, and I get along so well with them. So I'm not surprised. You're an edge person, Lena.
And there I am.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So, Salian, in a world of work titles such as CEO, COO, CFO, chairperson, managing director, president, etc., there are too many titles. Your title interestingly reads Chief Identity Hacker. Now, what is Chief Identity Hacker?
So I'm going to start by saying, when you work for somebody else, they get to call you whatever it is they want. And how wonderful is it when you have your own company? You can call yourself whatever you want. And I've always been a big believer in that. So other than Chief Identity Hacker, which I will explain to you, I also have a foundation and I'm called the Lead Tree Shaker. And I have to tell you, I used to chuckle because I would enter contracts with government entities and they would go, Dear Chief Identity Hacker or Dear Lead Tree Shaker. And I would be like, someone must be laughing writing me this letter at a government level, signing a contract with me. But Chief Identity Hacker at Gleek, which is my current title, when we think about hacker, we think about the negative connotation of hacker, someone who does something wrong. And I kind of like the play on that with what I do at Gleek, which is I look at the sides of you, the human sides of you that nobody ever sees. So it's almost like hacking into the human being behind your resume, behind all your degrees, behind all the ornaments, and seeing who you truly are. So that's what the title means.
I think it's a beautiful, I had no title when I started because I'm a teacher and I had no title, and I only got a title because my younger brother joined the business and he gave himself a designation of vice chairperson, and that's how I became chairperson. So it's interesting and it's beautiful because so many people are hung up on titles, but you seem to have a contrarian view to it all and saying, I'm not going to have a conventional traditional title. I'm going to redefine what it means to be titled.
Absolutely. And you know what? It's I think at the end of the day, the title has zero meaning when you're doing any business, because you can be a jack of all trades in the business and it has zero meaning. So you might as well have fun with it, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, Salian, Shai Rashif is building a university of the people, a university for 100 million students where education is free and the students pay a nominal amount for certification if they can afford it. An ultra low cost college degree. And Salian professors from Harvard and Stanford are flocking in to help him. What are your thoughts about such a university, Salian?
So, what's really interesting about University of the People is it got started back in 2009. And I want you to think about that. In 2009, we didn't really have a lot of online. What is today, because of COVID, completely normal online classes, professors visiting for wherever, student peer-to-peer community, which is what they started with University of the People back in 2009, is what the world is like today for every university. So I want to say, one, how forward thinking they were back in 2009. Number two, in terms of that, think about the value of a university degree and why it should be, it's really addressing a diversity and inclusion issue. So education, is said to be, this equalizer, but not everybody has access. So something like the University of the People or most mock classes or, anything that's free offered online in the education spectrum is, intended to kind of level that playing field And why it's so important at university is think of the value of a degree. Back in our parents' time, I mean, certainly for our parents or grandparents, you would graduate from university after making this huge investment, and the value of that degree was a career of 30 years. Today, you can graduate from university and you're lucky if the value of what you learned is even relevant to the marketplace. And you've invested all of this money. You have, especially in places like America, you have tremendous student loans, and there's no value to it. So at the end of the day, one really needs to ask, should we be paying for universities? And the new incoming president of the United States, Joe Biden, his wife, Dr. Biden, that's one of her big agendas, is making community colleges free and accessible to anyone. And why not? Because the lifespan of colleges and a college degree is very minimal now.
Yep, and I think a few things. One is parents need to understand that it's not, this whole drive to get into, Ivy League colleges. I think all parents need to rethink the whole thrust we have and importance we place on tertiary education. And I'm completely with you. As we were speaking before we started, what you create today is redundant 3 years from today. What you learn today is redundant 3 years from today. So that gap is just getting tighter and tighter. So by the time you get into university and you get out, you're already redundant what you sort of learned in year one. So I agree with you completely.
Other than the learning, though, Lena, I want to throw in here, for any of the parents listening in, why do we send our children to an IIT, or why do we send our children to an Harvard, or why do we send our children for Stanford? I mean, yes, we know they're going to have access to good education, but you can get access to good education pretty much anywhere today. A lot of times it's because of the company you're thinking they're going to be keeping at that university. So at IIM or IIT or Harvard or MIT, you're thinking my children are going to be amongst the brightest, the most driven, and those social circles is what's going to catapult them forward in their lives. And in many cases, Lena, that's true. I mean, if we sit back and we look at social circles that come out of, Ivy Leagues, those social circles go on to make connections and look after their own. But the world we are in today, I think it's very different now, with many people not going back physically to colleges and universities. And I think that whole idea, I can get a Harvard degree online. I can get an MIT degree online. I think that, we have to rethink what is that real value of those social networks we were expecting our children to have by going to these finer schools.
Fantastic. Those are very interesting comments, Sally-Ann. What I would like to ask you is, in your walk the talk, you state I'm a verb, not a noun. Very interesting. Where you said that I'm a verb, not a noun. Could you please explain to our corroboree what you mean by this, Sally-Ann?
Sure. So I'm a verb and not a noun. And I think, as a child growing up, I come from the West Indies, even though I grew up in Toronto and grew up in Europe. And I think in our minds, certainly for mine as a child, you became an adult and you became one thing. And, a noun, when we think of a noun, we think of something fixed. I become an adult and I become this thing and you're that. I became a lawyer very young at 21. And if I had to go back to that 21-year-old brain, I thought maybe that would be the trajectory of my life. Since then, I've become, created my own foundation. I've become an author. I've become a tech startup. And I think that ability to reinvent yourself and to stretch and constantly ask yourself, my book is called Who Will I Become? And I think many of us forget that we are allowed. It doesn't matter how old we are. It doesn't matter if we're at the peak of our career. We get to ask that question over and over again, who am I going to become? And know that tomorrow is a blank slate and that we can become whatever that may be, and not allow our past experience, our resumes, our credentials to stop us in what our next move should be. So that's what I mean by a verb, and I really hope until my last breath I continue to be a verb and not a noun, because I think this journey is one of becoming over and over again.
So, Sally, I'd like to just take a question from Asma Afreen. It's just going back to the previous comment. Can you think of ways we could recreate social networks while attending college online?
Sure. So I can tell you one of the ways that I did it, in attending my organizational behavior certification at Harvard. I did that sitting in Dubai, and went to Harvard just 6 weeks out of that that calendar year. And because we have all of these other networks existing today, so like LinkedIn or Facebook or Slack, or we don't physically now need to be in a place with someone to create deep connections with people. Zoom is kind of like our version of, let me go to the water cooler and have a chat with someone, right? So Lena, I think it's just become easier. I think in learning, however, when it comes to children, we have to create some of those environments in their world, right? So it happens a lot, I think, in gaming, with a lot of peer-to-peer gaming that's happening. But to be able to create those deep connections, I think it has to be a little more curated. But it's happening, Lena. Just think about most of us that have been not seeing people since March. And just think about the connections we have had with people, whether it's at work, whether it's in the classroom, and we physically have not been in the same place with so many of them. So it's happening right now.
Absolutely.
So, Salian, in the same talk, that is the walk the talk that you spoke about, which is available online, you speak about other people's expectations of you. So what are some of the dangers of parents placing their expectations of their children?
Oh my gosh. Hold on, we all have a list, right? Of who our parents wanted us to be and the ones that we made them proud on. And we once, there's a way I explain that and the dangers of it. So, I often ask people how many people are living outside the box, and so many people raise their hand. And then I ask the next question to people and I go, well, what is the box? And the box is, the first level, the bottom level of the box. Where does it come from? It comes from our parents. So as very young children, our parents kind of, very lovingly, with never bad intentions, might say things simple like, girls don't do that, or as boys, you should, or, and we listen. And that's the first side of the box in terms of how our worldview. It comes through the lens of our parents, in terms of expectations. What the next three sides I give, and this is just the amount of damage that is done, I give it to the whole education system, because that's how much damage the education system does to our perception of who we can become. So many of us are just seen in the education as the A's, the B's, and the F's. Right. And that's how, we go through the system as it separates us. You're in the sciences, you're in the arts, and somehow that means I'm less than. And then, it goes on. You got into Ivy League, you didn't get into Ivy League. And then the other side comes from your peers, when you get older, your work life. So that's the box is everybody's expectation of who you should be, with the base coming from our parents, who we love dearly and we don't ever want to let down. And every once in a while, we stick our head out, kind of showing up, going, I'm living outside of the box. And when there comes a time, however, if we're lucky, and if we have the courage, that we realize there is no box. And most of our lives, how do we not live everybody's version of who we should be? And how do we actually truly show up? Because, life is really a journey of just becoming yourself, more of yourself. So that's what I mean like that. So it becomes very dangerous, particularly in cultures that have strong family roots, like India, for example. And India is, very similar, like many other parts of the world, whether it be, Pakistan, whether it be in China, there's strong family roots that you don't want to let down family and culture and society. And, and those are very hard waves to swim against if your value system and if who you are doesn't align to those expectations. So not an easy one to address in cultures that are very embedded in it.
And Sally Ann, you know what I find interesting more and more, the more I read and the more research I do, you spoke about the A, Bs, and the Fs. And
Yes.
it seems to be the Bs who seem to be doing all the magic in the world, who
Yeah.
seem to be the creators, and it's not the As,
No.
and it may not be the Fs, but it's definitely
Oh.
the Bs and not the As.
Yeah, and you know what? I often, there is something called Dunning-Kruger effect, and there are many versions of Dunning-Kruger's, which basically is, you often think the ones who are the most loud and the most vivacious and sometimes the most brightest are the ones who are going to excel the most, and really it's that shy, quiet one that has all the magic. And I often say, the Bs and Cs are the ones who are so always trying to catch up. And they are the ones who generally, you are correct, you look across the spectrum, and they are the ones who are creating and innovating. And I don't know if it's because it's more of a growth mindset of always trying to strive versus more of a fixed I've arrived that allows them to do that. But you're absolutely correct. It's the B's and C's of the world that are kind of making all the waves and the splashes.
Absolutely. Sally Ann, schools focus on what gets measured and tested. And so far, this largely consists of standardized testing, which consists of a single correct answer. What are the dangers of this form of testing, Sally Ann?
Oh, wow. So that form of testing will work and has worked when the world is very predictable, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when everything is, where their place is, and it's very predictable, that can work. I want to say, the last 10 years or the last 15 years, the predictability in the world is becoming less and less. I mean, who would have predicted in February everything that has happened in March on with COVID on all sectors of the world? The predictability, when you look at something like, Dell's statistic on 85% of jobs that we do not know what they will be in 2030. Look at the skills and look at the shelf life of skills. There's so much unpredictability. So there is no one single answer, and standardized testing, which a lot of times those who did well in it are very good with memory work. So, and this is something I often say, very creative people always did terrible in standardized testing. I count myself as one of them. In my country of Trinidad and Tobago, there is something called the Common Entrance exam, all standardized tests. And this exam kind of determines if you're going to go to the right prestigious version of like a middle school. I don't even think it's high school because you're like 9 and 10 years old. And it's a very, very, you would study 2 years for it, and my parents thought I was going to fail the exam because I did not see the world in a linear A, B, C, and D. I always had an explanation for everything. So I never did well on standardized tests. And I have to give you a funny story. When I took that test, the day after the test, they were so convinced I was going to fail the test, they took me out of the private school I was in and sent me to the strictest school in the country, a public school with the most strict teacher, because they were so sure I was going to embarrass the family, fail the test, and they might as well send me to the most severe guy in the country to straighten out this daughter who could not answer anything in an A, B, C, and D answer. Now, so it's an issue, that type of linear view in the world today, because memory work is not going to cut it for situations and circumstances that we've never seen before, right? It's our ability to connect the dots in different domains and think through and reason through. And school is not set up to do that right now.
And I think it's really especially sad in India because, the schools being so competitive now, to get admissions, actually tom about their scores. So there's this thrust thrust by school owners onto principals, onto teachers, and parents. So this kid is just getting squished in the middle of getting the scores on the standardized tests, because that's what then we sort of award. The best schools are the ones that get top grades. So
yeah, but Lena, you have to think about why. How else is a school or an educator going to see the different elements that make up a young person? So think about if you're coming from a tier 3 city, or so they don't know your background, they don't really know your family, they don't know anything about your application of skills and reasoning. So the only thing in the pipeline is, let me put you this rigorous level of testing, because at least through that rigorous level of testing, I don't have to look at anything else on the scorecard. Did you come from, are you a kind person? Do you have good human skills? Do you have, so the reason the system exists is because we do not have other ways that's reliable that we can signal and give signs of potential. So the only signal we have of someone's potential is, I'm going to put you through this test, and if you get an A, that means you have potential. And it shows, it's scientifically proven, right? So potential then shows up in a resume as a degree from a certain institution. It is the worst predictor, a resume, of your academic credentials, of how you will perform on a job. It is scientifically proven. Yet that is the only signal that has been reliable for the last, let's look. The resume was invented by Leonardo da Vinci. Think about that.
Wow.
Resume was invented by the first resume was done by Leonardo da Vinci to get his first job, and we are still using that same document. With the, back then, it's interesting. If you Google it, you can actually see the resume. And what was interesting about Leonardo da Vinci's resume, Lena, is, back then, clearly they didn't have, the educational degrees, but what he did is he explained the skill he had and how he would apply it. So what Leonardo da Vinci did in his resume is the exact opposite what we do as humans. He did not pinpoint it to a degree. He said, I am really a creative thinker, and he goes, or I am good at my hands. And then he gave a situation and goes, here's how I would apply it. So it was the application of all of these different abilities, which is really what we should be showcasing. So he got it right back then. We just screwed it up along the way.
So he was a verb, not a noun as well.
Absolutely. I mean, you have to see it. When I saw it for the first time, I was like, this is what a resume should be.
Fantastic. That's a very interesting historical fact. Thank you for that, Salian. Lena and I explored defining and the living of one's values, Salian, something you have referred to. So what is the importance of mindfully choosing one's values and actually living life in accordance with those values, Salian?
Sure. So I think first, before I answer that, I'm going to talk a little bit about what values are, because many times we think we all know what they are, and many of us don't know what they are. So I'll tell you what they're not, first of all. So values are not those framed things that you see on a wall when you walk into companies, and they have like these values of, like, I don't know, wisdom and teamwork. And then you actually see how people operate in the organization, and it has nothing to do with what's on the wall. So values are verbs, not nouns. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing about values is, and people don't like to discuss that, values are fluid and they shift and change based on where you are in your life at any given moment. So many people often think, well, these are my values for the rest of my life. But you know what? Circumstances change, you change, and there's a certain level of fluidity. Now, there's some things that might always be true to you, right? So it might always be true to you. So for me, always true to me, and one of my values is that I'm always learning and knowledge. That has always been true towards my entire life. But then there are other values that have shifted and changed, because how wonderful is it for you to change your mind about things as you become more aware and more exposed to different things? So your values is your true north at any given moment in time. And that true north for you is allowed to shift and change. And that true north are composed of things that make you feel good. So your values should make you feel good. So think about all the times that you felt really incredible and accomplished. What was present? You know, that's how when I say to people when they're like, well, what are my values? And I go, think about all the times that you've felt, you know, alive. What was part of that for you? You know, so for me, it's curiosity, it's learning, it's adventure, you know, it's connection with people. And your values are personal to you. It's not supposed to look like anybody else's. It's not supposed to be defined by your family members or those around you. There's certainly some influence in it, but and I think when you're aligned to whatever those values are for you at that moment in time, I like to explain it this way. It's the difference between renting your life and owning your life. So, you know, when I was younger in my 20s, I was not aligned to my values at all. And it felt physically, I can look back at it in retrospect, it felt like I was renting my body. I was not occupying the length and breadth of it. When you're aligned in your thoughts, in your actions, in your surroundings, in what you do with your values, there's a certain occupying of your body, like you're grounded. You occupy the length and breadth. You understand the bigness of your presence as you're passing through. And I don't know how to explain it to you, because if someone explained it to me when I was back in my 20s, I would be like, what the hell are they talking about? Sorry, I don't know if that's a bad word. Sorry, parents. But it feels, there's a feeling to it. There's a feeling to it, and it feels really good.
So I think it's vitally important, and I think it's possibly more important to teach kids about values than it is about, you know, geography and history. And one of the ways of doing it is through literature, and that's one of the powerful ways we've always done it, is to look at a character and through his verbs, through his actions, what possibly are his values. And also, I think that the keen thing is we all want to live meaningful, purposeful, fulfilled lives, and we can only do that if we're living authentically. And as you said, if we're living in our body and not renting our body, we must spend more time talking to kids and getting them to understand what the values are and how to go about choosing, you know, values on purpose.
Yeah, and I think very often we make the mistake of talking to each other about values as this objective thing, and not bringing it back to what it might mean for you. It's the same thing like when you go into a company and they talk to you about the company values. And, you know, I often, when I go into companies and do a lot of organizational behavior work, I always say to them, I said, well, give me an example of last week, how that value of crucial conversations, what does that look and sound like within the company? And there'll be dead silence. Or I might look and go, any of the ones up on the wall. So it looks lovely, and we can speak about it in theory. But when you ask for concrete, you know, values should be tied to stories. So if I ask you, Lena, what are your values? And you tell me what they are, and then I should be able to very quickly say, give me a story about, you know, when did you realize that value was important to you? Tell me a story about, you know, that value and how you live it. That should be second nature. That's the verb versus the noun part of it, right? And I think we need to teach children, because very often I think the stories that, you know, even for little girls, you know, many people, you know, often we don't realize the books we give to little girls, we're not conscious of the heroine in the story always being the boy and not the girl, or the adventurer or the risk taker being the boy and not the girl. So I think often we have to turn the mirror on those stories and and same with values, and then ask, how does it play out in your life? And even at a very young age, they might not have the vocabulary yet, but if we can allow them to internalize it and continue internalizing it, then at some point it clicks for them. And they're able to then probably say, if they're ever confronted, even with their loved ones and parents, of something that violates their values, they actually know and they're self-aware of what's happening. They might not be able to do anything about it, but the self-awareness of it is crucial, I think, for a young person.
Fantastic. I think values is a very interesting topic, and we definitely can have a very long conversation on values. It's very interesting and exciting the way both of you all spoke on the word values. So Sally, the direction of your work has focus on soft human skills. How do you describe hard human skills and soft human skills? This conversation has been very interesting. We have already run out of time, but there are 2 or 3 more questions that I would love to ask you, Sally, and this is one of it.
We'll do it very quickly. So, I describe a skill like a house, right? And let's take, the simplest way is a job role. Take a job role, and every job role has hard skills and soft skills. Hard skills are the functional skills. So if you are an engineer, you need to know a certain coding language. If you're a teacher, you need to know certain tools of teaching. If you're a parent, you got to know some basic things in terms of parenting, right? Feed the child, change the child, all of those things. Take the child to school, make sure they have clothing on. The soft part is the human part. It's the empathy, the critical thinking, the collaboration, the leadership, the judgment and decision-making. So in every role, whether it's a job role or the role of just being a parent, there's a hard side of it and there's a soft side of it. And normally the soft side is what determines 85% of the success in that role.
What is your definition of success, Alian?
It's a feeling, and it's very personal to everyone. And I think we have to keep that in mind. Now, there are a lot of scorecards of success. So clearly the scorecard of a success, of a parent saying to a child, I want you to be a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, that scorecard of success really, and I want to make sure parents listening hear this, that scorecard of success is really saying to your child, I want you to have financial freedom, I want you to be respected, and I want you to make a difference in the world. That's actually what those titles mean. But that, in terms of a personal level of success, can look like your child being a master chef, or your child being an environmentalist, or your child being anything else. So success is a feeling, and the scorecard of it is very personal. And there's nothing wrong with a parent wanting those things for their child. It just sometimes comes out in the wrong wording, engineer.
So Sally, and I think the last question that we've got time for, given that you said 85% of our life is based on the soft human skills, what would you change in the way we do schooling, in the way we come to education?
Well, it's fundamentally flawed right now. So education, the way that it is right now, it's a fact, right? So if the measure of education is my child comes out of school and gets a good job, then education is failing, because over 50% of grads cannot get jobs. Employers will tell you 80% of the people they hire don't have the skills that they need. So if that is the measure, it's failing. So what needs to happen is a bridge needs to happen between what the world needs and what educators need to do to create that bridge, which is these beautiful children who can really go out and shine in the world. And that's where I think we're finally getting there, Lena. I think we're finally getting there. COVID got us to have the conversation. So we're using the same vocabulary now.
Fantastic. I think, guys, we have run out of time. This was such an interesting conversation. We are already 34 minutes down and we have not even realized it. It's just felt so pleasant and the flow was fantastic. So thank you so much, Sally. And I'm sure all the audience, our Corroboree, has enjoyed your comments and the way the conversation shaped up between all three of us. Lena, one parting shot before we conclude the show.
So I'm too old to say this, but Sally Ann, if I could, I'd say when I grow up, I want to be you.
Oh my God. So here's what I wish for you. First of all, thank you for having me. Thank you for your audience. And Lena, I wish for you that you are leap forward ahead of me tenfold and be the best version of you. That's what I wish for you.
Thank you.
Fantastic. That's so awesome. And friends, all the comments that you have posted online during the live show, Leena will make sure that she responds to every comment. And thank you once again for joining us, and wishing you all a very super happy 2021. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.